Thomas Winterton has been at Skinwalker Ranch longer than almost anyone connected to the current investigation. He has watched every season of evidence accumulate from the inside. He has seen what the cameras captured and what they did not. He has been present for the discoveries that made the broadcast record and the ones that did not. He has been silent about all of it, until now. What he just broke silence on changes everything the investigation has ever established. Subscribe and stay until the very end. Thomas Winterton's position at Skinwalker Ranch is one of the most significant and most underappreciated dimensions of the investigation's complete record. His role as the ranch's property manager, the person whose sustained physical presence on the property across the full span of the current investigation, gives him a relationship to the ranch's phenomenon that no visiting scientist, no production crew member, and no rotating cast of expert consultants can replicate, has placed him in a position of sustained direct exposure to what the ranch produces that the broadcast record has never fully represented. He is not there when the cameras arrive. He is there when they leave. He is there during the periods between filming sessions when the monitoring infrastructure runs continuously, and the anomalous events it documents are witnessed only by the people whose professional responsibility keeps them on the property regardless of whether the production is active. That sustained presence is the foundation of what his silence has been protecting and what its breaking now reveals. The broadcast record of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation presents the findings of a scientific team that arrives, investigates, and documents. What it does not present, what the format of a production-scheduled investigation cannot capture by definition, is the continuous record of what the property produces between sessions, witnessed by the people whose presence on the ranch is not contingent on a filming schedule. Thomas Winterton is the person whose accumulated experience of the ranch across both its documented and its undocumented periods gives him the most complete picture of what the property actually produces that any single individual connected to the investigation possesses. More complete than Brandon Fugel's, whose ownership does not require continuous physical presence. More complete than Travis Taylor's, whose scientific engagement with the property is organized around the investigation sessions rather than the intervals between them. Winterton has been at the ranch consistently across the full span of the investigation's history. What that sustained presence has produced in terms of his understanding of what the ranch is and what it does is what his silence has contained and what his breaking of it now releases into the public record for the first time. The discovery he is breaking silence on is not a single event from a single session. It is the culmination of what sustained presence at the most anomalous property in American research history produces in the person who has been most consistently exposed to it. The Skinwalker Ranch broadcast record is built around investigation sessions, the structured deployments of the scientific team and the production crew whose combined activity at the property generates the findings that the episodes present. Those sessions are significant. The evidence they have produced across 5 seasons of broadcast content represents the most extensively documented paranormal investigation record in American television history, but they represent a fraction of the complete record of what the property produces, the fraction that occurs during the specific windows when the investigation infrastructure is active and the cameras are running. The property does not confine its activity to those windows. The monitoring infrastructure that runs continuously between sessions has been accumulating a data record whose complete contents the broadcast episodes have addressed selectively, presenting the most dramatically significant findings while the full data set remains in the technical archive whose existence the investigation's public communications have acknowledged without fully characterizing. Thomas Winterton has direct knowledge of what that continuous monitoring record contains. He has been present when anomalous events occurred outside the filming schedule. He has observed phenomenon that the production cameras were not running to document, and that the monitoring infrastructure captured in the instrument data without the visual and contextual documentation that the filming sessions provide. He has had conversations with the scientific team about findings from the continuous monitoring record that have not entered any broadcast episode, and he has developed across his sustained presence at the property an understanding of the ranch's behavioral patterns, the cyclical character of its activity, the relationship between different categories of phenomenon, and the specific conditions under which the most extreme events occur, that the session-based investigation format has never been able to develop because it does not have access to the continuous record that sustained presence provides. What that understanding has produced in Thomas Winterton is the specific knowledge that his silence has been protecting, knowledge about a discovery whose character and whose implications the investigation's most recent findings have made impossible for him to continue managing within the silence that his professional relationship to the property had previously sustained. The discovery changed everything about what he understood the ranch to be. It changed everything about what he understood the investigation to be approaching. And it changed the specific calculation about whether continued silence was something his understanding of what the discovery means could accommodate. He broke the silence, and what he is saying in breaking it is what this video documents in full. The discovery Thomas Winterton is breaking silence on did not occur within a single investigation session whose broadcast version the audience can identify from the show's episode record. It is a discovery whose development unfolded across a period of continuous monitoring and direct observation that spans multiple investigation cycles, a finding whose full significance emerged progressively rather than in a single dramatic event, and whose complete picture required the sustained presence that Winterton's role at the property provided throughout its development. The beginning of what the discovery eventually revealed was present in the monitoring data earlier than the investigation's public communications have established as the timeline of the relevant findings. Winterton had been noting a specific pattern in the continuous monitoring data, a pattern whose character the investigation's technical team had been tracking within the session-based framework of the broadcast investigation, without having access to the complete picture that the continuous record provided. The electromagnetic data from the active zones of the property had been showing a directional change, not the fluctuating elevation and reduction pattern that transient anomalous events produce in monitoring data, but a sustained, consistent movement in a specific direction that the session-based review of the data had registered as a trend without being able to characterize its endpoint. The endpoint is what Winterton's continuous presence at the property allowed him to observe directly when the trend reached its conclusion. The Mesa Zone electromagnetic signature reached a threshold state, a specific configuration of the field readings across the monitoring network that the prior data had been moving toward progressively. On a night between investigation sessions when the production cameras were not running and the scientific team was not on the property, Winterton was there. He documented what occurred during the threshold event through the monitoring infrastructure's continuous recording. The instrument data exists in the complete archive, and through his direct observation of what the property produced at the surface level when the underground electromagnetic system reached the threshold configuration. What he observed directly that night is what his silence has been protecting. What the monitoring infrastructure documented is what the investigation's archive contains. And what the combination of direct observation and instrument documentation established about the nature of what the ranch has been approaching across 5 seasons of broadcast investigation is the discovery that changed everything about his understanding, and that the breaking of his silence now makes available to the investigation's audience for the first time. Thomas Winterton's account of what he observed directly during the threshold event. The specific phenomenon the property produced at the surface level when the underground electromagnetic system reached the configuration the monitoring data had been approaching is the most significant element of his silence breaking and the element whose character distinguishes his account from the instrument-based evidence that the investigation's scientific framework has been building across its seasons. The instrument data establishes what the monitoring network detected. Winterton's direct observation establishes what a human being experienced when the threshold was reached. The experiential dimension of the event, whose significance the instruments can measure but cannot fully represent. What he describes observing during the threshold event is consistent with the category of phenomenon that the Skinwalker Ranch investigation's most extreme prior documented events represent, but differs from those prior events in a specific and consequential way that his sustained exposure to the property's full range of outputs gives him the reference framework to identify precisely. The prior events documented in the broadcast record have been phenomena that the property produced in the investigation's vicinity. The threshold event produced phenomenon that was directed, that had the specific character of something whose output was aimed at a location and at the person present at that location, rather than simply occurring in the surrounding environment. Winterton describes the directional quality of what he observed with the plain, specific language of someone whose years of sustained exposure to the property have calibrated his assessment of what the ranch produces against the full range of its documented outputs. He is not describing the most extreme thing he has ever seen. He is describing the most specifically directed thing he has ever seen, the most direct evidence he has encountered in his time at the property that what operates at Skinwalker Ranch is not simply generating phenomenon but deploying it. The distinction between generation and deployment is the most significant thing his direct observation adds to the investigation's complete record. Generation is the behavior behavior of a system operating according to its nature. Deployment is the behavior of a system operating according to a purpose. What Thomas Winterton observed during the threshold event was not generation, it was deployment, and the target of the deployment, the specific location and the specific person at whom the phenomenon's directional output was aimed, was him. The 5 seasons of Skinwalker Ranch broadcast investigation have been building a progressive picture of what the property's underground environment contains and how it relates to the surface phenomenon the investigation has been documenting. The sonar mapping established the existence of structured underground voids whose geometry is inconsistent with natural cave formation. The drilling operation established the existence of a formation boundary whose resistance to approach the investigation has been documenting as it progressively narrowed the distance between the surface operation and the primary underground structure. The electromagnetic monitoring established the existence of a structured signal whose source is underground and whose surface manifestation is concentrated above the formation's most significant mapped features. And the aerial phenomenon documentation established the existence of a consistent relationship between the underground activity the instruments detect and the aerial events the cameras capture, a relationship whose character the investigation has been approaching an explanation for without yet arriving at one within the broadcast framework. What Thomas Winterton's discovery confirms about what the investigation has been approaching is the specific nature of the relationship between the underground infrastructure and the surface phenomenon, the mechanism connecting what is underground to what appears above it and to what the investigation's monitoring systems detect between those two locations. The threshold event he observed provided a direct demonstration of that mechanism, whose character the prior investigation's instrument data had been pointing toward without producing the kind of direct observational evidence that his presence at the property during the event provided. What he observed is the most direct evidence the investigation's complete record contains of the operational relationship between the underground formation and the surface phenomenon, the physical process by which what is underground produces what the cameras have been documenting above it across 5 seasons of broadcast investigation. That process, its character, its scale, and the specific implications it carries for understanding what the investigation has been studying, is what Winterton's account of the threshold event establishes in terms that the instrument data alone could never fully provide. And it is what the breaking of his silence now makes available to the investigation's audience as the most complete account of the ranch's operational nature that any single individual's direct experience of the property has ever produced. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation's scientific framework has always been built on instrument-based evidence. The electromagnetic readings, the sonar data, the ground-penetrating radar returns, the acoustic measurements, and the thermal imaging whose combined output represents the most extensively documented instrument record of paranormal phenomenon ever compiled at a single location. That instrument-based framework is the investigation's greatest strength in terms of the evidential quality of its findings and its greatest limitation in terms of the complete picture of what the property produces. Instruments measure specific physical parameters within specific detection ranges according to specific operational principles. They document what they are designed to detect within the limits of their design specifications, what occurs outside those limits, what the property produces in dimensions that the deployed instrument suite does not measure, and what the property produces experientially in the people who are directly present when it occurs, is not in the instrument record. Thomas Winterton's direct observation fills the gap that the instrument record's design limitations create. Not by contradicting the instrument data, his account of the threshold event is consistent with the instrument readings the monitoring infrastructure logged during the same period. By adding the dimensions of the event that the instruments did not capture, the directional character of what was produced, the specific quality of the experience of being the target of a directed deployment from the ranch's underground system, and the specific understanding of the ranch's operational nature that direct exposure to that deployment produces in a person whose prior sustained exposure to the property's full range of outputs has given them the reference framework to assess what they are experiencing accurately. Travis Taylor's scientific framework has been the investigation's primary tool for characterizing what the instruments detect. Thomas Winterton's sustained direct experience at the property is the investigation's primary evidence for what the instrument's limitations prevent them from detecting. His account of the threshold event is the most significant addition to the investigation's complete record that the instrument data alone cannot provide, because it documents the experiential dimension of what the underground formation does when it reaches a threshold state in terms that no instrument deployed at the property is designed to capture. That dimension is what his silence has been protecting, and what it's breaking now adds to everything the investigation's scientific record has established. Thomas Winterton's silence about the discovery has not been the silence of someone who did not understand the significance of what he observed. It has been the silence of someone who understood it completely and who made a specific and considered decision about what the appropriate management of that understanding required in the context of his professional relationship to the property and to the investigation that the fugal ownership of the ranch had organized around it. The factors that sustained the silence across the period between the threshold event and the current breaking of it are not difficult to identify for anyone who understands the specific professional and personal position that Winterton's role at the property creates. He is not a scientist whose professional identity is built on the public communication of research findings. He is not a television presenter whose commercial relationship to the investigation creates incentives for dramatic disclosure. He is the person whose sustained presence at the property, whose day-to-day professional responsibility for the ranch's operational continuity, makes his relationship to what the investigation produces fundamentally different from every other person connected to it. What changed that produced the decision to break the silence is connected to the investigation's most recent developments. The specific findings from the current investigation phase that have moved the investigation's public record to a point where the continued containment of what the threshold event established is no longer consistent with the honest representation of what the investigation has been approaching. The drilling operation's most recent advancement toward the primary underground void, its production of the response event whose basin-wide electromagnetic signature and whose physical effects on the investigation team established the formation's awareness of the drilling's approach, brought the investigation's public record to the threshold of the understanding that Winterton's direct observation of the threshold event had produced in him years earlier. The investigation is approaching what he already knows, and the specific decision that the approach's current proximity produced in him, the assessment that the distance between what the public record has established and what his direct observation established has narrowed to the point where continued silence about the gap is no longer defensible, is what produced the breaking of that silence now. He is not disclosing something the investigation has not been approaching. He is confirming where the approach leads before the investigation arrives there publicly. And the confirmation is what changes everything about how every prior season of the broadcast record should be understood. The History Channel's editorial relationship to the Skinwalker Ranch investigation evidence has been one of the consistent background questions of the broadcast record. The question of what the network knows about the complete investigation findings and what the editorial framework it applies to the broadcast episodes has been managing away from the audience's view. Thomas Winterton's account of the threshold event and the subsequent developments that led to the breaking of his silence addresses the network's awareness of the complete investigation record with a directness whose character reflects his specific knowledge of what the editorial process has received from the investigation and what it has done with that material. He is not speculating about what the network knows. He has been present during the periods when the monitoring data that the editorial process receives has been generated. He has had direct knowledge of the complete record's contents and direct awareness of the subset of that record that has entered the broadcast episodes. The gap between those two things, the gap that his sustained presence at the property and his knowledge of the complete monitoring record has given him a uniquely comprehensive view of, is what his account of the History Channel's editorial relationship to the investigation addresses. What he confirms about the network's awareness of the complete investigation findings is consistent with the pattern that the broadcast record's most attentive viewers have been identifying across multiple seasons. The pattern of evidence management whose character indicates institutional awareness of findings whose full representation would exceed the broadcast format's capacity to contain them within the ongoing search framework that the commercial relationship between the network and the investigation depends on. The threshold event's documentation is in the monitoring archive. The instrument data from the event is in the technical record. The editorial process has received both. What it has broadcast is neither. And Winterton's account of why the threshold event's documentation has not entered any broadcast episode, his specific characterization of the network's response to the material and the instructions that response produced about the material's broadcast status, is the most direct confirmation from the most credible source available of what the History Channel has been managing in its editorial relationship to the investigation's most significant findings. He was there. He knows what the complete record contains. He knows what the editorial process received. and he knows what the broadcast audience has been shown in place of it. The breaking of his silence about all three is what makes his account the most significant disclosure the investigation has ever produced. Thomas Winterton has spent more continuous time at Skinwalker Ranch than any other person connected to the current investigation. The silence he broke is the silence of that complete view. What its breaking changes is the audience's ability to continue understanding the broadcast record as a complete representation of what the investigation has found. It was never complete. The broadcast episodes are the managed fraction of a continuous record whose most significant findings have been contained in an archive whose contents his account has now partially characterized in a way the investigation's scientific framework has never achieved. He knows what is at Skinwalker Ranch, not in the speculative sense of a researcher whose instrument data points toward a conclusion, in the direct observational sense of a person who was present when the ranch demonstrated its operational nature without mediation. He was there when the threshold was reached. He saw what the deployment produced. The ranch is not passive. It is not simply producing phenomenon. It is deploying it, with awareness, with direction. Thomas Winterton's sustained presence gave him the most complete view of that any living person possesses. His silence is broken. What it contained changes everything. Skinwalker Ranch has spent decades producing phenomenon that science cannot explain and questions that no institution has been willing to answer. But what is breaking right now from the property is different in character from everything that came before it. This is not another anomalous reading or another piece of equipment failing in a localized zone. This is the ranch communicating something specific, and the news it is breaking is not good. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what Skinwalker Ranch is telling us right now demands to be heard. Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah has never been a passive location. Every other allegedly haunted or paranormal property in the documented history of this field sits and waits for investigators to come and find what it contains. Skinwalker Ranch has never operated that way. From the moment the Sherman family arrived in the early 1990s and found themselves confronted with a catalog of phenomenon that dismantled their understanding of the physical world within weeks of moving onto the property, the ranch has functioned less like a location where strange things happen and more like a location that is actively doing something. The distinction matters more now than it ever has. The Sherman family's account of their time on the property, cattle mutilated with a surgical precision that veterinary analysis could not attribute to any known predator or instrument, objects appearing and disappearing from locked structures, lights moving through the night sky in patterns that violated every known principle of aerodynamics, and at least one encounter with something physical and enormous that left evidence in the soil and left Terry Sherman with a conviction about what he had seen that decades of subsequent ridicule never shook, was not an account of a family being disturbed by random paranormal activity. It was an account of a family being subjected to a sustained and escalating series of events that appeared to have a source, a direction, and something uncomfortably close to an intention. The government researchers who followed the Shermans, first under the NIDS program funded by Robert Bigelow, then under the Pentagon's AAWSAP initiative that designated the ranch as a primary research site and directed classified resources toward understanding what was concentrated there, documented a phenomenon that behaved with the same quality of apparent intention across independent research programs separated by years of time and significant differences in methodology. The phenomenon responded to observation. It responded to technology. It appeared to track the capability level of whoever was investigating it and to calibrate its activity accordingly, producing evidence just beyond the reach of whatever instruments were currently deployed, as though it understood the threshold of what could be documented and stayed one step ahead of it. Brandon Fugel bought the property in 2016 with the resources and the determination to close that gap. What the investigations he has funded and facilitated across 5 seasons of documented research have produced is a body of evidence that has narrowed the distance between the phenomenon and the instruments dramatically. And what the ranch has been communicating through that narrowing distance recently is what this video is about. Because for the first time in the documented history of Skinwalker Ranch, the gap between what the phenomenon is doing and what the instruments can capture has closed enough that the message is becoming legible, and it is not a reassuring one. Every season of the documented Skinwalker Ranch investigation has produced a specific category of evidence that escalated in significance from the season before it. This is not the escalation pattern of a television production manufacturing drama through progressive revelation. It is a pattern that exists in the raw data, independent of how the broadcast episodes were assembled, and that researchers who have examined the underlying investigation records have consistently identified as meaningful. The early seasons established the baseline, the electromagnetic anomalies concentrated in specific zones of the property, the aerial phenomenon documented above the mesa, the physical effects on crew members and equipment operating in active areas of the ranch. That baseline was extraordinary by any standard applied to paranormal investigation, but it was also, in retrospect, the ranch operating at a level of output calibrated to the investigative capability that had been brought to bear on it. As the capability increased, as the technology deployed on the property became more sophisticated, as the scientific credentials of the researchers involved deepened, and as the commitment of resources to sustained investigation rather than episodic visits grew, the ranch's output escalated in direct proportion. The underground anomalies revealed by deep sonar work in later seasons represented a categorical shift from the surface and aerial phenomenon that dominated the early investigation record. The suggestion that significant structured voids existed beneath the mesa at depths that the drilling operation had not yet reached introduced a subterranean dimension to the ranch's activity that reframed everything the surface investigation had documented. If what was operating in the airspace above the ranch and affecting the physical environment on its surface was connected to something operating underground beneath it, then the property was not a location where a phenomenon was occurring. It was an interface, a point of contact between whatever existed beneath the ground and whatever was moving through the sky above it. The research conducted in the most recent seasons has been pushing toward that interface with an urgency and a methodological sophistication that no prior investigation of the property has matched. And what the instruments have been detecting as the investigation approaches the underground structures the sonar identified as what the ranch has apparently been building toward since the first camera was pointed at the sky above the mesa. The readings are not getting stranger as the investigation gets closer to the underground structures. They are getting clearer, and clarity, in this context, is more unsettling than strangeness. Strangeness is ambiguous. Clarity is not. What the instruments are now reading with increasing precision beneath the surface of Skinwalker Ranch is a signal that the investigation did not generate and cannot turn off. It was already there when the first instrument was deployed. It will be there when the last one is packed away. The question that the most recent data forces is not what the signal is. The question is what it means. And the answer to that question is the news the ranch is breaking right now. The mesa at the center of Skinwalker Ranch has been the focal point of the documented investigation since the earliest seasons of the show established it as the location of the most concentrated anomalous activity on the property, the aerial phenomenon documented above it, the electromagnetic readings that spike in its vicinity, the physical effects reported by crew members operating near it, and the underground sonar returns that suggest significant structured voids beneath it have all consistently pointed to the mesa as the hub of whatever network of activity the ranch represents. What has been established through the deep sonar and ground-penetrating radar work conducted in recent seasons is a picture of the underground environment beneath the mesa that no geological model for this region adequately accounts for. The voids detected at depth are not isolated. They are connected, a network of underground spaces whose arrangement and dimensions are inconsistent with the natural cave formation processes that the geological characteristics of the Uinta Basin would predict. Natural caves follow the path of least resistance through soluble rock, producing irregular asymmetrical voids shaped entirely by the chemistry of water moving through stone over geological time. What the instruments have mapped beneath the mesa does not follow that pattern. The spaces are too consistent in their geometry, the connections between them are too regular in their spacing, and the depths at which the largest voids are concentrated correspond precisely with the depths at which the electromagnetic anomalies detected on the surface are most intensely focused, a correspondence that indicates the underground structures and the surface phenomenon are not independent features of the property but components of the same system operating across the boundary between the subterranean environment and the surface above it. The drilling operation that has been attempting to physically access the underground structures beneath the mesa has encountered resistance that the geological composition of the formation does not explain. Equipment that operates without difficulty on comparable geological formations elsewhere in the Uinta Basin has failed at specific depths beneath the mesa in patterns that the production's technical team has documented across multiple multiple drilling attempts, and that are consistent enough to constitute a documented pattern rather than a series of independent mechanical failures. Something beneath the mesa is not indifferent to the drilling operation. The resistance the drilling has encountered is calibrated. It intensifies at specific depths and in specific locations in a manner that correlates with the underground structure map the sonar has produced. Whatever is down there knows the drilling is happening, and the news it is communicating through the pattern of that resistance is the first specific message the ranch has delivered in a form that the investigation has been technically equipped to read. Among the most significant and least discussed findings to emerge from the Skinwalker Ranch investigation in its most recent phases is the detection of structured electromagnetic signals emanating from beneath the property at frequencies and with characteristics that the investigation's scientific team has been unable to attribute to any known natural or human-made source. Electromagnetic signals in themselves are not extraordinary. The ranch has been producing anomalous electromagnetic readings since the first instrument was deployed on the property. What distinguishes the signals detected in the most recent phase of the investigation is their structure. Random electromagnetic noise produced by geological activity, atmospheric conditions, or equipment interference is distinguishable from structured signals by its lack of internal organization. It varies without pattern, spikes without regularity, and carries no information in the technical sense of that word. What the instruments beneath the Skinwalker Ranch mesa have been detecting does not have those characteristics. The signals carry internal organization. They repeat with a regularity that random noise does not produce. They vary in ways that are patterned rather than chaotic. Variations that cycle through sequences with a consistency that, in any other context, would immediately be classified as communication rather than background noise. Travis Taylor, whose background in advanced physics and directed energy research gives him a technical framework for signal analysis that most paranormal investigators lack, has referenced the underground signal data in terms that stop short of explicit characterization, but that carry an implication. His scientific training would not permit him to state directly without a level of verification the investigation has not yet achieved. What he has said in the careful language of a scientist who understands the professional consequences of overstating a finding is that the signal characteristics are inconsistent with any known geological or atmospheric process, and that the data warrants further analysis by specialists whose expertise in signal structure and communication theory exceeds what the current investigation team encompasses. That is a scientist's way of saying that what the instruments are detecting beneath Skinwalker Ranch looks like a message. The news the ranch is breaking is embedded in that signal, and the reason it is not good is not because the signal is threatening in any overt sense. It is because a structured signal of unknown origin emanating from beneath a property with the documented history of Skinwalker Ranch detected at depths that correspond to underground structures whose geometry is inconsistent with natural formation by instruments whose readings have been independently verified across multiple sessions does not have a reassuring explanation available to it. Every explanation that fits the evidence points in the same direction, and that direction is one that the scientific establishment, the governmental institutions that have been monitoring this property for decades, and the broader public conversation about what is and is not possible in the physical world are not currently equipped to absorb without significant disruption to frameworks that a great many institutions have a great deal invested in maintaining. The broadcast version of Skinwalker Ranch across its most recent seasons has demonstrated a quality that careful viewers of the show have noted without always being able to articulate precisely. The investigations have been producing data of increasing specificity and significance. The scientific team has been responding to that data with a visible quality of controlled urgency, a restraint in how conclusions are stated that reads less like scientific caution and more like awareness of what stating those conclusions plainly would mean. There is a difference between a scientist who has ambiguous data and is genuinely uncertain about its implications, and a scientist who has data whose implications are clear and is choosing carefully how much of that clarity to put on record. The behavior of the Skinwalker Ranch scientific team across the most recent seasons has increasingly exhibited the characteristics of the second category rather than the first. Travis Taylor does not appear uncertain about what the underground signal data means. He appears aware of what it means and in the process of determining what can be said about it within a framework of professional and institutional constraints that the broadcast format of the show has never fully surfaced for the audience. Brandon Fugel's recent public statements about the ranch have shifted in a direction that is consistent with a property owner who has moved from investigation towards something closer to preparation, a subtle but detectable change in how he discusses what the ranch has produced and what his responsibilities in relation to those findings are. The questions the investigation is no longer asking are as significant as the questions it is actively pursuing. Early seasons of the show organized each episode around specific investigative questions. What is causing the electromagnetic anomaly in this zone? What is the origin of the aerial phenomenon above the mesa? What does the sonar return in this section of the underground indicate? The most recent investigation activity has moved away from that question-per-episode structure towards something that looks more like the systematic documentation of a phenomenon whose basic nature the team has resolved and whose specific parameters they are now mapping with the focused methodology of people who know what they are dealing with and are building a record of it. That shift in investigative posture is itself the most significant communication the ranch has produced in its most recent phase. The investigation has stopped asking what is here. It is now asking what it is doing and what comes next. The answer to that second question is the news the ranch is breaking. And the reason the team has been careful about how explicitly it states that answer on camera is the same reason that the government programs that investigated this property for decades never published their findings. Some answers, once they are fully public, cannot be managed. And the people who have been closest to this investigation for the longest time understand that what the ranch is communicating right now is exactly that kind of answer. To understand the full weight of what Skinwalker Ranch is currently communicating, it is necessary to pull back from the property itself and examine it within the context of the broader Uinta Basin, because the phenomenon documented at the ranch is not confined to its boundaries and never has been. The basin stretches across a vast section of northeastern Utah, whose geological, atmospheric, and electromagnetic characteristics have made it one of the most consistently anomalous regions in the continental United States for as long as systematic measurement has been applied to it. The concentration of reported UAP activity above the basin, the pattern of electromagnetic anomalies distributed across its geography, and the underground structural abnormalities that deep geological surveys have documented across multiple sections of the region all indicate that what is operating at Skinwalker Ranch is a local manifestation of a basin-wide phenomenon rather than an isolated property-specific event. The discoveries made in recent years at Blind Frog Ranch, located less than 15 miles from Skinwalker Ranch within the same basin, have added a physical dimension to this understanding that the aerial and electromagnetic evidence alone could not provide. The underground chamber accessed by the Blind Frog Ranch excavation team, with its geometric consistency, its treated wall surfaces, and the structured markings documented within it, represents the first direct physical access point to whatever network of underground structures the deep sonar work across the basin has been suggesting exists beneath this region. The correspondence between what the Blind Frog Ranch excavation found underground and what the Skinwalker Ranch sonar has been mapping beneath the mesa is too specific to be coincidental. Both properties sit above underground formations whose geometry is inconsistent with natural cave development. Both properties produce surface phenomena, electromagnetic anomalies, aerial objects, physical effects on human observers that is concentrated directly above those underground formations. And both properties have demonstrated a pattern of active resistance to investigation that goes beyond the passive strangeness of genuinely haunted locations and into the territory of a system responding to external interference. The Ute people, whose ancestral relationship to this land predates any outside investigation, have maintained for generations that the basin is a place of threshold, a region where something that normally operates beyond the range of human perception becomes intermittently accessible. The structured underground signal detected beneath Skinwalker Ranch in the most recent investigation phase, mapped against the physical evidence of constructed underground chambers discovered at Blind Frog Ranch 15 miles away, suggests that the threshold the Ute traditions describe is not a metaphor. It is a physical infrastructure. And whatever built it is communicating something through it right now that the investigation on the surface above it is only beginning to be technically equipped to receive. The history of governmental interest in Skinwalker Ranch is now sufficiently documented in the public record that it can be addressed without speculation. The AAWSAP program, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, operated from 2007 through 2012 under Pentagon funding channeled through the Defense Intelligence Agency, and directed significant classified research resources toward the Uinta Basin with Skinwalker Ranch as its primary investigation site. The program's existence was not publicly acknowledged until a series of investigative journalism pieces and subsequent congressional attention forced partial disclosure in 2017. What was disclosed was the program's existence and its general focus. What was not disclosed was its findings. The portions of the AAWSAP research that have entered the public record through Freedom of Information requests and the limited voluntary disclosures of former program participants indicate a body of findings that goes significantly beyond what any public investigation of the ranch has produced. Researchers operating under the program documented phenomenon at the ranch that included physical trace evidence, biological effects on human observers, and instrument readings whose technical specifications have not been fully released in a systematic and well-resourced investigation that ran for years with a level of funding and institutional support that dwarfs anything the private investigation of the property has been able to deploy. What those researchers concluded, based on years of classified fieldwork at a location they had the resources to study in ways the broadcast investigation has never been permitted to match, has never been made public in any form that constitutes a full accounting of their findings. The pattern of how former AAWSAP participants discuss the ranch when they discuss it at all, with a specificity of restraint that indicates not uncertainty about conclusions but awareness of constraints on disclosure, is consistent with people who know what is underneath that mesa and have been instructed not to say it plainly. The structured signal detected by the current investigation's instruments corresponds in its frequency, characteristics to readings documented in technical appendices of AAWSAP-related reports that have partially surfaced through Freedom of Information disclosures. The government has been receiving this signal for longer than the current investigation has been running. They know what it is. They know what it means. And the fact that the current investigation is now detecting it with instruments precise enough to characterize its structure is the development that makes the news the ranch is breaking now different from anything it has communicated before. The investigation has caught up to the signal, and catching up to it means that the question of what it contains can no longer be deferred by reference to insufficient instrument sensitivity. The data is now good enough to read. The reading is not good, and the government's decades of silence about what they found at this property is the clearest indication available of exactly how not good it is. The news the ranch is breaking is not metaphorical. The structured signal beneath the mesa has been increasing in intensity across the most recent investigation sessions in a pattern that the technical team has documented as directional, not fluctuating randomly but building consistently in one direction. The signal intensifies when the drilling advances. It spikes at specific depths. It modulates when the drilling pauses. Whatever is generating that signal from beneath the mesa is aware of the investigation happening above it and is responding to it in real time in a manner the current instruments can now document with enough precision to rule out every conventional explanation. Something underneath Skinwalker Ranch knows the investigation is getting closer. The gap between what the phenomenon is doing and what the instruments can capture has finally closed enough that the response is legible. And what it is communicating through that response is not a fluctuation in background noise. It is a signal with internal structure, directional intent, and a source that the investigation is now close enough to that turning back would not change what has already been received. During a laser experiment on Skinwalker Ranch, crew members were physically attacked by an unknown force. Dr. Travis Taylor was thrown backward. Eric Bard collapsed with radiation exposure. Multiple injuries required hospitalization. Medical records confirm the damage. The footage captured it all. Subscribe for the full investigation into what attacked Brandon Fugel's team. The investigation that would result in the most violent incident in Skinwalker Ranch history began with what seemed like a straightforward scientific experiment designed by Dr. Travis Taylor to test a controversial hypothesis about the anomaly zone above the property. For months, the team had documented strange phenomena occurring in the airspace directly above the mesa. Unexplained radar returns, GPS failures, and electromagnetic disturbances that defied conventional explanation. Travis theorized that whatever caused these anomalies might be responsive to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, particularly high-powered laser emissions in the infrared spectrum. Brandon Fugel approved a significant budget expenditure to acquire military-grade laser equipment capable of projecting concentrated beams into the anomaly zone at precise frequencies Travis had calculated based on previous sensor data. The experiment was ambitious and potentially groundbreaking. If successful, it could provide the first reproducible method for triggering and studying the phenomena under controlled conditions rather than waiting for spontaneous occurrences. The setup took an entire day, with Travis personally overseeing the installation of laser arrays, sensor equipment, and recording devices positioned across the mesa to capture data from multiple angles simultaneously. Brandon invited additional scientific observers, including physicists and aerospace engineers, to witness the experiment and provide independent verification of results. The atmosphere was one of excitement and anticipation rather than concern. Nobody on the team believed they were doing anything particularly dangerous. They'd conducted dozens of experiments at the ranch without incident, and this seemed like just another data collection opportunity using more sophisticated equipment than previous investigations. The experiment was scheduled for early evening when atmospheric conditions were optimal and the setting sun wouldn't interfere with laser visibility. As the team assembled on the mesa and Travis began the activation sequence for the laser array, everyone felt confident this would be a routine scientific investigation that might yield interesting data. Within minutes, that confidence would be shattered as something responded to their laser emissions with immediate and violent hostility. The footage from that evening shows the exact moment when scientific curiosity crossed a boundary into genuine danger, triggering a response from whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at Skinwalker Ranch that proved it could and would defend itself against perceived threats with physical force. Dr. Travis Taylor was operating the primary laser control station, making fine adjustments to beam frequency and intensity while monitoring real-time sensor feedback displayed on multiple laptop screens arrayed before him. The footage shows Travis focused intently on his work, calling out technical observations to the team about electromagnetic readings that were beginning to spike in ways consistent with his theoretical predictions. For approximately 8 minutes, the experiment proceeded exactly as planned. The lasers were projecting into the anomaly zone, sensors were collecting data, and cameras were recording everything from multiple angles for later analysis. Then something changed. Travis noticed a sudden surge in electromagnetic readings that exceeded anything the equipment was designed to measure, causing several sensors to overload and shut down automatically. He reached for the laser controls to reduce power output, concerned that the equipment was malfunctioning or that they were inadvertently creating a feedback loop. Before Travis could touch the controls, he was violently struck by an invisible force that witnesses describe as impossibly powerful. The camera footage captures the moment in disturbing clarity. Travis is standing normally one instant, then the next, he's thrown backwards several feet, as if hit by a massive unseen impact. His body leaves the ground entirely before crashing into equipment behind him with enough force to damage the metal cases and cause Travis to cry out in obvious pain. The entire incident occurs in less than 2 seconds, but the violence and power behind whatever struck him is undeniable on the footage. Team members rushed to Travis immediately, finding him dazed and struggling to breathe from what appeared to be blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. When they helped him to his feet and examined him, visible injuries were already forming, dark bruising across his torso in a pattern that suggested impact from a large focused force rather than falling against equipment edges. Travis insisted he hadn't tripped or lost his balance. Something had physically hit him with tremendous power from a direction where nothing visible existed on any camera angle. Brandon Fugel made the immediate decision to shut down the laser array and secure Travis medical attention. But before the team could begin powering down equipment, the situation escalated dramatically as additional crew members came under attack. Eric Bard was positioned approximately 30 yards from Travis at a secondary monitoring station, collecting spectrographic data and observing atmospheric changes during the laser experiment. When Travis was attacked, Eric had immediately started moving toward him to provide assistance. But before he'd covered half the distance, he suddenly stopped, staggered, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and upper body. The footage shows Eric's collapse happening within seconds of Travis being struck, suggesting a coordinated assault on multiple team members rather than isolated incidents. Crew members who reached Eric first found him in severe distress. He was vomiting. His skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and he reported intense burning sensations across his exposed skin areas, including his face, neck, and hands. The symptoms were consistent with acute radiation exposure, which seemed impossible given that no radiation sources were present in the experiment beyond normal background levels. Eric was clearly in worse condition than Travis, unable to stand without support and exhibiting signs of shock, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, and disorientation about where he was and what had happened. Brandon ordered immediate evacuation and called for emergency medical response, recognizing this had escalated beyond anything the team's first aid training could handle. While waiting for paramedics, team members noticed something disturbing. Eric's exposed skin areas were developing visible burns that appeared to be progressing in real time, starting as redness but darkening to second-degree burn appearance within minutes. Medical equipment the team had on site for monitoring crew health during investigations revealed elevated radiation readings on Eric's body and clothing that exceeded safe exposure limits. This was medically impossible. Radiation doesn't spontaneously appear on a person without a source, and there were no radioactive materials anywhere near the experiment site. When paramedics arrived and transported Eric to the hospital, emergency room physicians were baffled by his presentation. The burns, radiation readings, and systemic symptoms were consistent with significant radiation exposure, yet there was no logical source for such exposure. Eric's condition stabilized after several hours of treatment, but the medical mystery of how he'd been exposed to radiation in the middle of a Utah desert remained completely unexplained. The incident proved that whatever had attacked Travis hadn't stopped with a single victim. It had systematically targeted multiple team members with different forms of assault. Brandon Fugel stood on the mesa watching two of his team members injured and possibly dying, facing the most difficult decision of his tenure as Skinwalker Ranch owner. As a successful businessman accustomed to calculated risks and data-driven decisions, Brandon now confronted a situation where no amount of wealth, planning, or expertise could guarantee his team's safety against threats that defied scientific explanation. His first instinct was immediate evacuation, get everyone off the mesa, shut down all experiments, and regroup once injuries were assessed and medical professionals provided guidance. But the scientist part of Brandon recognized they were documenting something unprecedented. Whatever had attacked Travis and Eric had responded to their experiment in ways that proved intelligence, awareness, and capability for physical interaction with humans. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough evidence the ranch had been seeking for decades, and abandoning the investigation meant potentially losing data that could never be replicated. The ethical calculation was brutal. Continue collecting data while people were being injured, or prioritize immediate safety over scientific discovery. Brandon made calls to medical consultants describing Eric's symptoms, seeking guidance on whether they were dealing with a medical emergency requiring immediate hospital transport or something that could be managed on-site while securing equipment and data. The responses were alarming. Radiation exposure severe enough to cause visible burns and systemic symptoms required immediate professional medical intervention and potentially weeks of monitoring for delayed effects, including organ damage and immune system compromise. There was no ethical justification for keeping Eric on the mesa 1 second longer than necessary for safe transport. Travis, despite his own injuries and obvious pain, argued for continuing the experiment. He recognized the scientific importance of what they were documenting and believed they could implement safety protocols to protect remaining team members while collecting additional data. Brandon overruled him, making the definitive call to shut down all equipment and evacuate to the command center. But even that decision proved complicated when something began attacking from above, making evacuation itself dangerous. Brandon found himself coordinating a retreat under hostile conditions from an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't defend against using any conventional security measures. His background in real estate development and business management had prepared him for financial risks and complex negotiations, not tactical evacuation of personnel under assault from unexplained phenomena. As the team began shutting down equipment and preparing to evacuate the mesa, the attacks escalated in a way that suggested whatever they'd provoked was determined to prevent them from leaving, or perhaps to punish them for the laser experiment. Multiple crew members reported feeling impacts from above, not gentle touches or subjective sensations, but forceful strikes that knocked equipment from their hands and caused them to stumble or fall. The camera footage captures several incidents where objects and people appear to be struck by invisible forces from the empty sky above. One particularly dramatic sequence shows a heavy metal equipment case being lifted off the ground and thrown laterally across the mesa, traveling at least 15 feet before crashing down and breaking open. No wind, no visible force, just the case suddenly airborne and violently displaced. Physics alone made this impossible. The case weighed over 40 pounds and would require significant force applied at precise angles to achieve the trajectory captured on video. Crew members scrambled to secure equipment and themselves as the aerial assault continued. Sound equipment recorded bizarre audio during this period, deep rumbling sounds that seemed to come from directly overhead despite clear skies, high-pitched whining noises that hurt team members' ears and couldn't be isolated to any equipment source, and what several people described as a rhythmic pulsing that they felt physically in their chests, like standing near massive subwoofers at a concert. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested intelligence. Different crew members were being targeted with different types of assault simultaneously, as if something was observing their positions and choosing appropriate methods to harass or injure each person. Brandon's security personnel attempted to provide protection, but were helpless against threats they couldn't see or predict. One security officer was struck hard enough to knock his radio from his belt, the device skittering across the mesa as if kicked by an invisible foot. Another reported feeling hands pushing against his back, trying to force him toward the mesa's edge, though no one was near him, and footage confirmed he was isolated from other team members. The psychological terror of being under attack from unseen forces was as damaging as the physical impacts. Trained security professionals accustomed to assessing and responding to threats found themselves completely ineffective against an enemy that violated every assumption about how physical reality operates. While chaos unfolded on the mesa, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton and Chief Security Officer Bryant Arnold were positioned at the ranch perimeter, monitoring access points and maintaining communication with the investigation team. Their experience that night proved the attacks weren't confined to the Mesa experiment site, but were happening simultaneously across different areas of the property. Thomas was conducting a routine perimeter check in his vehicle when he reported via radio that he was being followed by something he couldn't see, but could hear moving through brush parallel to the road. The sound was too large and too coordinated to be wildlife, and it maintained pace with his vehicle even as he accelerated. When Thomas stopped to investigate with spotlights, he saw nothing. But the moment he turned off his vehicle's lights, he heard what he described as footsteps approaching his position from multiple directions simultaneously, as if he was being surrounded. His radio transmission to Bryant captured genuine fear in his voice as he requested immediate backup. Bryant responded in his security vehicle but experienced catastrophic equipment failure en route. His radio cut out mid-transmission. His vehicle's electrical system began malfunctioning with lights flickering and engine sputtering, and his GPS navigation showed his location as somewhere over 100 miles away. Despite being on ranch property he'd driven countless times, the equipment failures left Bryant stranded and unable to reach Thomas or communicate with the command center. Both men were effectively isolated in darkness on a property where something was demonstrating hostile intent toward the investigation team. The most terrifying aspect of their experience was the physical attacks they endured while separated and vulnerable. Thomas reported being shoved hard enough to stumble while standing outside his vehicle trying to restart his radio. He felt distinct pressure against his chest and shoulders, as if invisible hands were pushing him. And when he retreated into his vehicle and turned on interior lights, he discovered fresh scratches on his arms that were bleeding and stinging. Bryant had similar experiences. Objects in his vehicle were knocked from their positions. His rearview mirror was violently twisted sideways, and he felt repeated impacts against the vehicle's exterior as if something was striking the doors and hood with considerable force. The radio eventually came back online with Bryant and Thomas both reporting to Brandon that they were under attack and requesting permission to evacuate the property entirely. The physical evidence from the Skinwalker Ranch attacks provided undeniable proof that something had caused genuine harm to multiple team members, documented through medical records that would stand up to legal and scientific scrutiny. Eric Bard's hospital evaluation revealed radiation exposure levels that triggered mandatory reporting to federal authorities who monitor such incidents for public safety and national security purposes. His radiation readings measured at levels consistent with proximity to industrial radioactive sources or medical radiation equipment, yet no such sources existed anywhere near the ranch during the experiment. The burns on Eric's skin were classified as second-degree thermal and radiation burns, requiring specialized treatment including topical medications and monitoring for infection. Blood work showed elevated white blood cell counts and other markers consistent with the body's response to radiation damage, effects that typically take hours or days to appear but manifested in Eric within minutes of exposure. Medical professionals who treated Eric documented their findings with the caveat that the exposure source remained unknown and unexplained, unusual language in medical records that typically identify specific causes for injuries. Travis Taylor's injuries were equally well documented, though different in nature. X-rays revealed soft tissue trauma across his chest and abdomen consistent with blunt force impact from a large object striking him with significant velocity. The bruising patterns were photographed and measured, showing an impact zone approximately 12 inches in diameter, centered on his sternum and spreading across his ribs. Sports medicine specialists consulted about the injuries compared them to impacts seen in football players hit by tackles or martial artists struck during full-contact sparring, the kind of damage that requires substantial force delivered by something solid. What made Travis's injuries medically puzzling was the absence of corresponding external trauma. When someone is hit hard enough to cause that level of internal bruising, there's typically skin abrasions, cuts, or surface damage from whatever struck them. Travis had none of that. His skin was intact except for the deep bruising, as if he'd been hit by something that could deliver tremendous force without surface friction or cutting edges. Thomas Winterton and Brian Arnold's scratches were examined by medical staff and photographed for documentation. The scratch patterns were analyzed and determined to be consistent with fingernail or claw marks rather than contact with equipment edges or vegetation. The injuries were fresh, appearing during the investigation period, and located on body areas that were covered by clothing when the men left the command center. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his own injuries, immediately began analyzing the data collected during the attack, determined to find scientific explanations for what had happened to him and his team members. His preliminary analysis revealed electromagnetic anomalies that correlated precisely with the timing of each physical attack, suggesting a connection between energy phenomena and the violence experienced by the crew. During the 8 minutes of laser operation before Travis was struck, sensors detected a progressive buildup of electromagnetic energy in the anomaly zone at frequencies that matched the laser emissions, but at amplitudes exponentially higher than what the equipment was producing. Travis theorized they'd inadvertently created a resonance effect where the laser energy was being amplified by something in the atmosphere or space above the mesa, building to levels that triggered a defensive or retaliatory response from whatever generates the phenomena. The moment of Travis's attack corresponded exactly with a massive electromagnetic pulse detected by equipment positioned around the mesa. The pulse registered across multiple sensor types simultaneously. Magnetometers, RF spectrum analyzers, and electric field detectors all recorded spikes that exceeded their measurement capabilities by orders of magnitude. The pulse originated from a point in the anomaly zone directly above where Travis was standing and propagated outward in a focused beam rather than radiating equally in all directions. This directional characteristic suggested intentional targeting rather than random energy discharge. Eric Bard's radiation exposure remained the most scientifically puzzling aspect because radiation detectors positioned around the mesa showed no elevated readings in the environment, only on Eric's body and clothing after his collapse. Travis hypothesized that Eric had been exposed to a highly localized and brief burst of radiation, intense enough to cause damage, but short-lived enough to dissipate before environmental sensors could detect it. This would require technology or natural phenomena capable of generating and directing radiation with precision that exceeded any known human capability. The aerial assault phase showed even more interesting data. High-speed cameras captured frame-by-frame sequences of objects being displaced, and careful analysis revealed subtle atmospheric distortions at the moment of impact, like heat shimmer or gravitational lensing effects that indicated something was present, even if not directly visible. Travis believed they were observing camouflaged or phase-shifted matter that could interact physically with normal matter, while remaining largely invisible to human perception and most sensor types. The violent attacks during the Mesa experiment fundamentally transformed how Brandon Fugel approaches investigations at Skinwalker Ranch, implementing safety protocols that acknowledge the genuine physical dangers posed by whatever phenomena exist on the property. The most immediate change was mandatory medical monitoring for all personnel during investigations. Team members now wear biosensors that continuously track heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and radiation exposure, with real-time data transmitted to medical personnel stationed at the command center who can order immediate evacuation if dangerous physiological changes are detected. Brandon invested in a mobile medical unit permanently stationed at the ranch, equipped with emergency treatment capabilities and staffed by paramedics trained in radiation exposure response, trauma care, and psychological crisis intervention. The unit includes equipment to measure and document radiation levels on individuals, allowing immediate assessment of exposure risks. All investigation plans now undergo safety review by an independent committee including physicians, radiation safety experts, and security professionals who assess potential risks and recommend protective measures before experiments are approved. High-risk investigations require written, informed consent from all participants, acknowledging specific dangers and agreeing they understand experiments might trigger hostile responses from unknown phenomena. Brandon also implemented tactical withdrawal protocols, predetermined evacuation routes, rally points, and communication procedures for situations where investigations need to be abandoned quickly under potentially hostile conditions. Security personnel receive training in protecting team members from threats that may not be visible or predictable using conventional security methods. The psychological impact on team members has been significant and ongoing. Travis Taylor, despite being a trained scientist comfortable with uncertainty and unexplained phenomena, admits the experience changed his perspective on Skinwalker Ranch investigations. He's more cautious now about experiments that might be perceived as aggressive or threatening by whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at the ranch, recognizing that their laser experiment may have crossed a boundary that provoked retaliation. Some crew members requested transfers to other projects after witnessing the attacks, unwilling to continue working at a location where they might be physically harmed by forces they can't understand or defend against. Brandon has made counseling resources available to all staff and doesn't pressure anyone to participate in investigations they're uncomfortable with. Skinwalker Ranch, the most scientifically studied paranormal hotspot on Earth. Strange lights, cattle mutilations, phenomena that defies explanation. Brandon Fugal owns it. Dr. Travis Taylor investigates it. In 2024, ground-penetrating radar revealed something hidden beneath the mesa, a sealed cave, deliberately closed from the inside. When they finally broke through, what they found disturbed everyone. 15 skeletons arranged in a circle, symbols covering every wall, a bottomless hole in the center. And the moment they opened it, everything on the ranch changed. Phenomena exploded. Team members got sick. Some refused to go back inside. The Ute tribe warned for generations this place should never be opened. They were right, because what's happening now is worse than anything in the ranch's history. This is what scientists found in the sealed cave, and what it unleashed. Skinwalker Ranch sits on 512 acres in Utah's Uinta Basin, and for generations, it's been known as a place where the impossible happens regularly. The Ute tribe has warned about this land for centuries, calling it the path of the Skinwalker, a forbidden zone where evil spirits dwell and shapeshifters roam. Indigenous people avoided the area entirely, passing down stories of cursed ground where reality itself breaks down. The ranch entered modern awareness in 1994 when the Sherman family purchased the property with dreams of cattle farming. Those dreams turned into nightmares almost immediately. They experienced phenomena that shouldn't exist. Cattle were mutilated with surgical precision, organs removed cleanly with no blood at the scene. UFOs appeared regularly over the property, performing maneuvers that defied physics. Creatures were seen that seemed bulletproof, absorbing rifle shots without effect. Objects appeared and disappeared. Poltergeist activity plagued their home. After 2 years of terror, the Shermans sold the ranch and never spoke publicly about what they experienced. In 1996, billionaire aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow purchased the property and funded extensive scientific research. He created the National Institute for Discovery Science and stationed PhD scientists on the ranch 24/7. They documented hundreds of anomalous events over 2 decades. Bigelow spent millions trying to understand the phenomena, but most of the research remained classified. In 2016, he sold the ranch to Brandon Fugal. Brandon Fugal is a Utah real estate mogul and technology investor who purchased Skinwalker Ranch for $4.5 million with a clear mission: apply rigorous science to paranormal claims and share the findings transparently. He partnered with the History Channel to document everything in the series The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. He brought in Dr. Travis Taylor as chief scientist, an aerospace engineer and astrophysicist with multiple PhDs who has worked for the Department of Defense and NASA. Dr. Taylor's approach is simple. If it can be measured, it can be understood. Over the years, the documented phenomena have been extensive and disturbing. Radiation spikes in specific locations, GPS and electronic equipment failures, electromagnetic anomalies, cattle deaths with no explanation, orbs and light phenomena captured on camera, invisible forces affecting people physically. The mesa, A large elevated plateau on the property has consistently been the site of the most intense activity. Native warnings specifically mentioned the mesa as off-limits. Animals refused to go near certain areas. Even before the cave discovery, it was avoided by those who knew the ranch's history. But in 2024, ground-penetrating radar revealed that the mesa was hiding something far more disturbing than anyone imagined. In the spring of 2024, Dr. Travis Taylor's team was conducting routine geophysical surveys of the mesa using ground-penetrating radar. They were looking for underground water sources or natural voids, standard protocol for understanding the property's subsurface. Multiple passes were made over the mesa, with data being recorded continuously. Then the anomaly appeared on their screens. The scans revealed a large void space beneath the mesa, approximately 40 feet below the surface. But this wasn't a natural cave formation. The void was far too regular, with geometric patterns that suggested intentional excavation. The size was estimated at over 30 feet in multiple directions, and the shape didn't match any known cave systems in the area. Dr. Taylor was initially skeptical, thinking the equipment might be malfunctioning, but repeated scans confirmed the anomaly was real. Brandon Fugel immediately called a team meeting. The excitement was palpable, but so was the apprehension. They consulted historical geological surveys of the area. There were no records of any excavation on the property, no mining claims, no operations of any kind. The geological surveys showed no natural caves in this location. This chamber shouldn't exist. Brandon Fugel reached out to Ute tribal elders, asking about the mesa's history. The response was immediate and unsettling. The elders confirmed knowledge of what they called the sealed place. Their ancestors had sealed it many generations ago. It contained something that should not walk, they said. Opening it would let the darkness spread. Some team members dismissed the warnings as superstition. Others were deeply unsettled. The team deployed additional scanning technology, magnetometry, resistivity surveys, seismic reflection, LiDAR scans, and thermal imaging all confirmed the void's existence. The scans also revealed something else. A collapsed opening at the base of the mesa's cliff face. It had been deliberately filled with rocks and soil. This wasn't a natural cave-in, but an intentional closure. Once the vegetation was cleared, stonework became visible. The stones had been placed with clear purpose, fitted together precisely. Brandon Fugel authorized careful excavation despite the warnings. Dr. Taylor insisted on strict safety protocols. Environmental monitoring equipment was staged around the site. Medical personnel were put on standby. Documentation cameras were positioned everywhere. The team was divided on whether they should proceed. Scientific curiosity battled against respect for ancient warnings, but the decision was made. They would open the sealed cave. The only question remaining was what they would find inside, and whether the Ute elders' warnings would prove true. Excavation began in June 2024, with a small team assembled for the initial work. Brandon Fugel and Dr. Travis Taylor were both present, along with security personnel stationed around the perimeter. Cameras recorded from multiple angles. Radiation detectors and air monitors were active. Atmospheric sensors measured everything. There was a palpable sense of unease among the crew from the moment work began. The stones were removed carefully, one by one, each cataloged and photographed. The stonework was remarkable. The stones fit together precisely with no mortar, expertly stacked by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. The age of the placement was impossible to determine, but the vegetation growth suggested the seal had been in place for centuries. The work proceeded slower than anticipated because of the care required. Strange occurrences began almost immediately. Equipment malfunctions increased dramatically. Batteries drained inexplicably fast, sometimes dying in minutes. Compass needles spun erratically. Team members reported severe headaches that wouldn't respond to medication. The feeling of being watched intensified. Animals on the property became extremely agitated. Ravens began gathering in unusual numbers near the excavation site, watching silently from the cliff edges. Late one afternoon, the final stones were removed. A dark opening was revealed, leading into the mesa. Cold air rushed out forcefully, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and wrong. The radiation detector spiked briefly, causing everyone to step back instinctively. They waited for the air to stabilize before attempting entry. Dr. Taylor volunteered to go first, with Brandon Fugel insisting on joining him. 2 security personnel followed. They donned full safety gear, oxygen monitors, communication headsets, and helmet-mounted cameras. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. The air quality readings were normal, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the atmosphere. Their flashlight beams revealed worked stone walls, not a natural cave, but a deliberately carved tunnel. The walls showed clear tool marks. The ceiling was carved in a dome shape. The floor was relatively level and clear of debris. The tunnel extended approximately 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Electromagnetic readings were fluctuating wildly, instruments registering impossible data. Near the entrance, strange symbols were carved into the stone, geometric patterns and curved lines that didn't match Ute script or any known native writing system. Some resembled petroglyphs found elsewhere on the ranch, but others were completely unfamiliar. Everything was photographed extensively. The team moved slowly deeper into the tunnel. Communication with the surface crew maintained. The sense of dread was increasing with every step. Then their lights hit the main chamber, and they saw what had been waiting in the darkness for centuries. The main chamber was roughly circular, approximately 40 feet in diameter with a domed ceiling reaching 12 feet at its highest point. This was not a natural cave. Every surface showed evidence of deliberate excavation. The walls had been carved with precision. The floor was covered in thick dust and sediment. Multiple alcoves had been cut into the walls at regular intervals, and scattered throughout the chamber were the skeletal remains of at least 15 human beings. The bodies were positioned in a disturbing arrangement. They formed a rough circle, all facing toward the center of the chamber. Some were in the wall alcoves. Others lay on the floor where they had fallen. The positions suggested these people had died here, not been buried after death. Several appeared to have their hands bound. Skulls showed signs of severe trauma. Some remains showed evidence of fire, with charring visible on bones and walls. The scene suggested ritual violence or mass execution. Dr. Travis Taylor's immediate assessment was chilling. "This is not a burial chamber," he said. "These people died violently. The age of the remains was uncertain without proper testing, but the preservation was unusual for the environment. Some skeletons were nearly complete while others were fragmented. Documentation began immediately. Every detail photographed and recorded. Objects were scattered among the remains. Stone tools and implements, carved bone fragments, metal objects corroded beyond recognition, pottery shards with disturbing designs, what appeared to be ceremonial items arranged deliberately around the bodies. Everything suggested a ritualistic purpose that no one could fully understand. The walls were completely covered in symbols. The ceiling, too, was heavily marked with carvings, geometric shapes intertwined with figures, humanoid forms with animal features, creatures that didn't match any known animal. The symbols repeated in complex patterns across every surface, as if the entire chamber was meant to convey a message or serve a specific purpose. In the exact center of the chamber stood a stone platform, circular and approximately 6 feet across. Its surface was worn smooth from extensive use. Dark staining covered the platform that could be ancient blood. Channels had been carved into the surface, all leading to a hole in the center. The hole was approximately 2 feet in diameter. When they shined flashlights into it, the beams disappeared into darkness. They dropped stones into the opening. No sound of impact ever returned. The air rising from the hole felt wrong. The temperature differential was extreme. Electromagnetic readings spiked dramatically near it. Team members reported feeling compelled to look into it, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Brandon Fugel ordered no one to approach the platform. Near the entrance, 2 sets of remains were positioned differently from the others. Their bones were reaching toward the sealed opening, hands extended as if they had tried desperately to escape. These bodies appeared newer than the others. They had died after the cave was sealed, trapped inside deliberately, left to die in complete darkness. The first night after the cave was opened, nearly every team member experienced vivid nightmares. What made it more disturbing was that multiple people reported the same images in their dreams. Visions of figures standing in the cave, shadows moving in the darkness. The sense of being watched became overwhelming. Security cameras positioned around the ranch captured unexplained movements near the mesa. Lights appeared that hadn't been seen before. The ranch experienced more anomalous activity in that single night than it had in the previous month combined. Physical effects on the team began immediately. Dr. Travis Taylor developed a severe headache that lasted 3 days despite medication. Other team members reported identical symptoms. Nausea and vertigo became common complaints. Unexplained skin rashes appeared on some personnel. Bruising manifested on arms and legs without any memory of injury. Medical examinations found nothing wrong, yet the symptoms persisted. Equipment failures escalated to unprecedented levels. Electronics near the cave entrance died constantly. Cameras failed within minutes of being positioned. Batteries that should have lasted hours drained in seconds. GPS systems showed impossible readings, placing the ranch in locations thousands of miles away. Communication equipment experienced constant interference. Even backup systems were affected. Some equipment was permanently damaged beyond repair. The phenomena across the entire ranch intensified dramatically. UFO sightings tripled in frequency. Events that previously occurred only at night now happened in broad daylight. Orbs appeared nightly over the mesa, captured on multiple camera systems. Electromagnetic anomalies were detected everywhere. Radiation spikes occurred in multiple locations simultaneously. The cattle became extremely agitated, refusing to graze near the mesa. Dogs wouldn't approach the area at all. Wildlife abandoned the entire section of the property. One senior researcher, an experienced investigator not easily frightened, demanded reassignment after just 2 trips into the cave. He claimed to hear voices in the chamber when no one else was speaking. He said something had followed him out of the cave and into his home. He reported seeing a shadow figure standing in his bedroom at night. Within a week, he left Skinwalker Ranch entirely and refused to discuss what he'd experienced. Brandon Fugal found himself torn between scientific curiosity and genuine concern for his team's safety. He consulted with experts nationwide, debating whether the cave should be resealed immediately. The documentary crew was capturing everything, and he was acutely aware of how the public might react to what they'd found. Dr. Travis Taylor maintained his scientific approach, insisting that the phenomena could be explained through rigorous study. He brought in additional monitoring equipment and increased sensor coverage across the property. But privately, even he admitted to feeling profound unease. "Something changed when we opened that cave," he told Brandon Fugal, "and whatever changed wasn't changing back." A forensic anthropologist was brought to the site to examine the skeletal remains. The bones were carefully removed for detailed analysis. Age estimation placed them between 150 and 300 years old. Though the range was unusually broad due to preservation anomalies, the remains represented a mix of male and female individuals, ranging from children to elderly adults. Trauma was evident on most of the skeletons, with causes of death varying across multiple factors. The injuries were deeply disturbing. Blunt force trauma had shattered skulls. Broken bones showed defensive wounds, arms raised to ward off attacks. Some remains showed evidence of burning, charred in ways that suggested they were alive when the fire touched them. Cuts consistent with stone tools marked several bones. The pattern suggested ritual violence rather than warfare. Most horrifying was evidence of cannibalism on some of the bones, cut marks and breakage consistent with deliberate consumption of human flesh. DNA analysis was sent to multiple laboratories. The results came back incomplete and confusing. The DNA was degraded far beyond what the age of the remains should produce. Contamination from unknown sources appeared in every sample. Some samples showed genetic markers that the labs flagged as impossible, anomalies that shouldn't exist in human DNA. The laboratories requested resampling, certain there had been errors. The second round of tests produced the same inexplicable results. Linguists and anthropologists analyzed the symbols carved throughout the chamber. No match was found to any known writing system. Some similarities existed to ancient petroglyphs found worldwide, and the geometric patterns suggested possible astronomical alignments. But the meanings remained completely unknown. Several researchers who studied the symbols refused to continue their work. They claimed the carvings gave them nightmares and feelings of dread they couldn't shake. The central stone platform was tested for biological material. Results confirmed the presence of human blood from multiple individuals deposited over an extended period of time. Chemical analysis revealed other substances mixed with the blood, including possible hallucinogenic compounds. The platform had been used repeatedly for ritual purposes that remained unclear. The bottomless hole presented the most confounding mystery. Attempts to measure its depth all failed. A laser range finder returned no signal. A weighted line was lowered 200 feet without finding bottom. The geology of the area suggested such a deep shaft shouldn't exist. A camera was lowered into the darkness, but the video feed became increasingly distorted after 50 feet, showing static and impossible images before the camera was retrieved damaged and unusable. Radiation and electromagnetic readings in the chamber fluctuated dramatically, spiking without pattern or warning. Dr. Travis Taylor noted that the patterns seemed to pulse at regular intervals, as if the cave itself was breathing. Brandon Fugal requested a formal consultation with Ute tribal elders following the cave's opening. The elders agreed to visit the site but refused to enter the cave itself. They stood at the entrance, spoke prayers in their native language, and confirmed that this was indeed the sealed place their ancestors had warned about for generations. The stories passed down through oral tradition were true. The elders explained the Skinwalker legend, emphasizing it was not metaphor but literal belief. Skinwalkers were witches who gained dark powers through forbidden acts. They could shapeshift into animals and committed terrible crimes to acquire these abilities. They were outcasts who practiced rituals the tribe had banned. Eventually, the Skinwalkers were hunted by tribal warriors. This cave became their final refuge. According to the elders, the Skinwalkers had gathered in this place to conduct ceremonies involving human sacrifice. They were attempting to open a doorway, a portal to what the Ute called the Dark World. The tribal elders of that era decided the practices had to end permanently. Warriors surrounded the cave while medicine men performed protective rituals. Those trapped inside begged to be released. The tribe ignored their pleas and sealed the entrance with sacred stones, leaving them to die in complete darkness. The sealing was intentional entombment. The belief was that sealing the cave would trap the Skinwalkers' evil spirits inside, preventing them from ever influencing the world again. The warnings were passed down through every generation. The path of the Skinwalker must stay closed forever. The elders reacted with deep concern and visible anger when they learned the seal had been broken. They felt it showed profound disrespect for sacred boundaries that had been maintained for centuries. They predicted severe consequences. The strange phenomena would increase dramatically. The darkness would spread beyond the cave. The ranch would become far more dangerous than it had ever been. They offered to perform a new sealing ceremony using traditional methods. Brandon Fugel responded respectfully to their concerns but remained committed to the scientific investigation. He promised to proceed carefully and agreed to consult with the elders on all major decisions regarding the cave. The elders reluctantly accepted this compromise, but their final words were ominous. "You will see what we warned you about." They left sacred tobacco at the cave entrance as protection and refused to return to Skinwalker Ranch. Within days, their predictions began coming true in ways that terrified even the most skeptical members of the team. The phenomena on Skinwalker Ranch increased by over 300% following the cave's opening. Events that previously occurred only at night now happened during broad daylight. The intensity and frequency both escalated dramatically. The correlation between opening the cave and the surge in activity was undeniable, and the scientific team documented everything. Cattle were found dead with the same surgical precision that had plagued the ranch for decades. Internal organs were removed cleanly with no blood at the scene. No tracks or evidence of predators existed anywhere near the bodies. Security cameras positioned to watch the herds showed absolutely nothing during the times the deaths occurred. The mutilations happened within direct view of the mesa, following the same pattern that had terrorized the Sherman family 30 years earlier. Orbs began appearing nightly over the mesa, captured on multiple camera systems simultaneously. They performed maneuvers that violated known physics, accelerating instantly and changing direction without slowing. Larger craft were witnessed by the entire team on several occasions. Dr. Travis Taylor stated on camera, "We are observing technology that is beyond our current understanding." The government was contacted but provided no response. Team members reported disturbing experiences with time distortion. Hours would pass that felt like only minutes. People discovered memory gaps during investigations, unable to account for periods of missing time. Team members found themselves in locations they had no memory of walking to. Equipment registered impossible data that contradicted what observers remembered witnessing. Security footage showed events that nobody on the team could recall happening. Multiple team members reported encounters with the same entity, a tall humanoid figure with proportions that seemed fundamentally wrong. It was seen repeatedly near the cave entrance after dark. The figure would disappear instantly when approached. Infrared cameras occasionally captured it, but the heat signature was inconsistent with any living being. The descriptions matched exactly what previous ranch owners had reported over the decades. Brandon Fugel ensured everything was recorded and cataloged. Hundreds of hours of footage accumulated. Data from dozens of sensor arrays was analyzed by computer systems looking for patterns. Correlations emerged clearly linking the cave to surface events, but no satisfactory explanation existed for what was happening. Dr. Travis Taylor's perspective evolved dramatically. The scientist who had arrived as a skeptic now admitted publicly, "This challenges everything we understand about physics and reality. Conventional science cannot explain our observations." He began considering theories he would have dismissed before, including interdimensional hypotheses and possible connections between human consciousness and the phenomena. "We may have opened something we don't understand," he confessed to Brandon Fugel privately, "and I don't know if we can close it again." Brandon Fugel has spent millions of dollars and years of his life trying to understand what is happening beneath Skinwalker Ranch. He has brought in physicists, aerospace engineers, government-connected scientists, and some of the most sophisticated detection equipment ever deployed at a private research site. He has watched his team get hurt, watched equipment fail without explanation, and watched the mesa resist every attempt to penetrate its secrets. But what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa during the most recent phase of investigation was something that none of their frameworks had prepared them for, something that moved, something that responded, something alive. And when Brandon Fugel saw the data, he shut it all down. If you are new here, subscribe now, because what is living beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch changes everything the scientific team thought they were dealing with. To understand why the detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch produced a response serious enough to shut down the entire operation, you first have to understand what the mesa is within the context of the ranch and why. Across every phase of investigation the property has undergone, from the earliest NIDS research through the current Fugel-era scientific program, the mesa has always occupied a position at the absolute center of whatever is happening on that land. The mesa is not simply an elevated geological feature on the Skinwalker Ranch property. It is the focal point around which the most significant and the most inexplicable phenomena documented at the ranch have consistently organized themselves across decades of investigation by multiple independent research teams. The Sherman family, who owned the ranch during the period that first brought it to national attention, documented their most extreme and most disturbing experiences in proximity to the mesa. The NADS team that investigated the property in the late 1990s and early 2000s identified the mesa as the location producing the highest concentration of anomalous phenomena and dedicated significant investigative resources to understanding what was generating those phenomena without arriving at a satisfactory explanation. Every subsequent investigation team, including the current scientific program operating under Brandon Fugel's ownership, has found the mesa to be the location where the ranch's phenomena are most concentrated, most consistent, and most resistant to conventional explanation. The physical characteristics of the mesa have been studied extensively without producing a complete understanding of its geology or its composition. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted during the current investigation have produced returns suggesting structural anomalies beneath the mesa's surface that do not correspond to the expected geological profile of the region. Anomalies that the scientific team has discussed publicly in terms that acknowledge their existence without fully accounting for what produced them or what they contain. Drilling operations directed at the mesa have encountered resistance and equipment failure at depths and under conditions that the team's engineers cannot explain through conventional geological frameworks. The airspace above the mesa has produced more documented anomalous aerial phenomena than any other location on the ranch, and the physical effects on researchers who spend extended time in close proximity to the mesa, the health impacts, the equipment malfunctions, the psychological and physiological responses that the show has documented across multiple seasons are more pronounced and more severe in the mesa's vicinity than anywhere else on the property, all of which means that the detection of something alive beneath the mesa is not simply a new data point added to an existing investigation. It is the thing that every phase of Skinwalker Ranch investigation has been moving toward, the answer to the question that the mesa has been generating for decades, arriving in a form that nobody on the scientific team was prepared to receive. Understanding the significance of what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa requires understanding the program that produced the detection. Because the investigation Brandon Fugel has built at Skinwalker Ranch is not a television production using scientific aesthetics for dramatic effect. It is a genuine and substantially funded scientific research program that happens to be documented by a television production, and the distinction matters because it determines the credibility of everything the program produces, including the detection that shut the ranch down. When Brandon Fugel purchased Skinwalker Ranch in 2016 for $4.5 million, he brought to the property something that previous investigation phases had lacked: the combination of substantial private resources, genuine scientific credibility through his connections to the aerospace and technology industries, and a personal commitment to applying the most rigorous available scientific methodology to a set of phenomena that previous investigations had documented but not explained. The team he assembled reflects that commitment. Dr. Travis Taylor, whose background in astrophysics, optical science, and aerospace defense research provided the program with a level of scientific credentialing that no previous Skinwalker Ranch investigation had possessed, was the lead scientist for the program's most intensive investigative phases. The supporting scientific team included specialists in geology, physics, biology, chemistry, and electromagnetic phenomena, as well as engineers with backgrounds in defense and aerospace technology who brought both expertise and equipment to the investigation that would not otherwise have been available to a private research program of this kind. The equipment deployed at the ranch under Fugel's program represents a significant escalation from previous investigation phases. Ground-penetrating radar systems capable of imaging subsurface features at depths and resolutions not previously applied to the property, atmospheric monitoring equipment drawn from aerospace and defense applications, biological detection systems designed for field deployment in environments with complex and variable conditions, and a network of fixed and mobile sensors providing continuous monitoring of the property's electromagnetic, acoustic, and environmental conditions at a level of coverage and resolution that the NIDES program, operating with the technology of the late 1990s, could not have achieved. It is this program, built over years of sustained investment and scientific engagement, that produced the detection beneath the mesa. And it is the credibility of this program, established through seasons of documented scientific work at the ranch, that makes the shutdown Brandon Fugel ordered in response to that detection something that cannot be dismissed as a production decision or a dramatic narrative choice. The detection that changed everything at Skinwalker Ranch did not arrive as a single dramatic instrument reading or a single moment of equipment response. It arrived the way the most significant scientific findings typically arrive, as an accumulation of data from multiple independent systems that individually suggested something unusual and collectively pointed toward a conclusion that the scientific team found both compelling and deeply unsettling. The initial indication came from the ground-penetrating radar system that had been conducting ongoing subsurface surveys of the mesa as part of the investigation's long-term geological mapping program. A survey pass conducted during the most recent phase of investigation returned data showing a subsurface anomaly at a depth consistent with the structural irregularities documented in previous surveys, but with a characteristic that had not appeared in prior data. The anomaly was not static. The returns showed a feature that had changed position between successive survey passes, conducted at intervals that the geological team assessed as too short for any known geological process to account for the degree of positional change recorded. Something beneath the mesa had moved. The geological team's initial response was to treat the finding as an instrument artifact, a malfunction or calibration error in the survey equipment, and to run the survey again with recalibrated instruments before drawing any conclusions. The repeat surveys did not resolve the anomaly. They confirmed it, and they added detail that the initial pass had not captured. The moving feature was not uniform in its subsurface signature. It had a boundary, a defined edge that distinguished it from the surrounding geological material in a way that suggested an object or a mass rather than a fluid or gaseous pocket. And its movement between survey passes was not random. It had direction, and across multiple successive surveys, that direction was consistent, suggesting displacement along a trajectory rather than diffuse shifting in response to environmental pressure. When the radar findings were cross-referenced with data from the biological detection systems that had been operating continuously in the mesa's vicinity, the picture that emerged was one that the scientific team found genuinely difficult to process. The biological sensors had been recording environmental data throughout the period covered by the radar surveys. When that data was reviewed against the timeline of the subsurface anomaly's movements, correlations emerged that the team's scientists assessed as statistically significant. The biological sensor readings elevated during periods corresponding to the anomaly's detected movement, not slightly, substantially and repeatedly, across multiple instances in the data record, with a consistency that the team's statisticians found could not be attributed to coincidence or environmental noise. Something beneath the mesa was moving, and when it moved, the biological detection equipment responded as if something alive was responsible for the movement. The response of the Skinwalker Ranch scientific team to the data produced by the mesa detection was not immediate alarm or immediate shutdown. It was the methodical and disciplined process of scientists who have spent years operating in an environment that consistently produces data that resists explanation, and who have learned, through that experience, to subject anomalous findings to the most rigorous available scrutiny before drawing conclusions. The first response was verification. Every instrument that had contributed data to the anomalous finding was tested, recalibrated, and run through independent diagnostic assessment to rule out equipment malfunction as an explanation. The ground-penetrating radar system was checked against known reference targets to confirm its spatial accuracy and its positional consistency. The biological detection equipment was calibrated against known environmental inputs to establish that its elevated readings during the anomaly anomaly periods were not the product of instrument drift or environmental interference. The data processing and analysis pipeline was reviewed by the team's software and engineering specialists to confirm that the correlations identified between the radar data and the biological sensor data were not artifacts of the analytical method. The verification process took time and was conducted with a thoroughness that reflected both the seriousness of the finding and the scientific team's awareness that a conclusion of this magnitude required the complete elimination of conventional explanations before it could be taken seriously. When the verification process was complete, the conventional explanations had been eliminated. The anomaly was real. The movement was real. The correlation between the movement and the biological sensor response was real. What remained, after every instrument check and every analytical review, was data describing something beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch that was moving with direction and consistency, and whose movement was accompanied by biological sensor responses that the team's scientists could not account for through any mechanism other than the presence of a living organism at the depth and location the radar data indicated. That conclusion was presented to Brandon Fugal. His response was immediate. He reviewed the data personally, asked the scientific team to walk him through their verification process, confirmed that the conventional explanations had been thoroughly excluded, and then made the decision that the data required. He shut the investigation down. The decision Brandon Fugal made when the scientific team presented him with the mesa detection data was not a simple decision, and understanding it fully requires understanding both what the data showed and what Brandon Fugal's relationship to the ranch, to the investigation, and to the responsibility of ownership actually is. Brandon Fugal is not a person who shuts things down easily or without substantial cause. He is a businessman of considerable success, accustomed to making decisions under conditions of uncertainty and to proceeding with complex and high-stakes endeavors when the evidence supports doing so. He purchased Skinwalker Ranch over the objections of people in his professional circle who thought the acquisition was irrational. He has continued to invest in its investigation through seasons of findings that raised more questions than they answered, and through personal experiences on the property that he has described as genuinely disturbing. He has watched members of his scientific team suffer health effects from their work at the ranch and has continued the investigation. He is not someone who stops because things are difficult or because the findings are uncomfortable. What the mesa detection data presented him with was something different from discomfort or difficulty. It presented him with a direct implication about what the investigation was dealing with beneath the mesa, an implication that changed the risk calculus for every person operating on the ranch in a fundamental way. If something alive is moving beneath the mesa at the depth and scale the data suggested, the investigation's existing safety protocols were built around an incomplete understanding of what those protocols needed to protect against. Every drilling operation directed at the mesa, every ground disturbance in its vicinity, every activity that had been conducted on the basis of an understanding of the mesa as a geological feature rather than a geological feature containing living presence needed to be reassessed against a different set of risk parameters. The shutdown was not a retreat. It was a recognition that the investigation had arrived at a threshold where proceeding without a fundamental reassessment of what was being dealt with and what precautions that dealing required would be irresponsible toward the people whose safety Brandon Fugal is responsible for. He shut it down because the data told him that what was beneath the mesa was not what the investigation had assumed, and that assuming incorrectly about what is beneath the mesa has consequences that the scientific team could not yet fully scope. The detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch raises a question that the scientific community and the broader public interested in the ranch's phenomena will inevitably ask. How did every previous investigation of the property, across decades of research by multiple independent teams with access to the best available technology of their respective eras, miss something that the current program found? The answer to that question is not simple, and it is not flattering to the idea that the previous investigation phases were comprehensive in their scope or their methodology, but it is also not a reflection of incompetence or carelessness on the part of the researchers who conducted them. The NIDES program that investigated the ranch in the late 1990s and early 2000s was operating at the frontier of applied paranormal and anomalous phenomena research with the technology and the methodological frameworks available at that time. The ground-penetrating radar systems available to that program were less capable than the current program's equipment in their depth penetration, their spatial resolution, and their ability to detect subtle changes in subsurface features over time. The biological detection capabilities available to NIDS were not designed for the specific application of detecting biological presence at depth in a complex geological environment. The program documented extraordinary things. It established the foundational evidentiary record for the current investigation to build on, but it was not equipped to find what the current program found, and the absence of a finding is not evidence of an absence. The Sherman family, who preceded NIDS and whose experiences on the property remain the most visceral and the most personally documented in the ranch's recorded history, described encounters and phenomena that, in retrospect, are consistent with an active presence beneath the mesa in ways that were not recognized as such at the time because the framework for interpreting them in those terms did not exist. The cattle mutilations, the disappearances, the sense described by multiple family members of something beneath the ground that was aware of their presence on the surface. These experiences were documented as evidence of the ranch's anomalous character without being understood as potentially diagnostic of specifically biological subsurface presence. What the current program's detection did was not discover something that previous investigations failed to find. It developed the methodological capability to formally detect and document something that the ranch's own history had been pointing toward for decades. The implications of a confirmed living presence beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch extend in multiple directions simultaneously, and none of those directions leads to a simple or comfortable destination. The scientific implications alone are significant enough to represent a fundamental challenge to the existing understanding of what can live where, at what depth, under what conditions, and with what relationship to the surface environment directly above it. The depth at which the detection data places the anomalous biological presence is not a depth at which any known organism of the implied scale is documented to exist in the geological context of the American interior. Known subterranean life at significant depth consists of microbial communities, insects, and small invertebrates occupying cave systems and groundwater environments, none of which produce the scale of biological sensor response or the subsurface displacement profile that the mesa detection data describes. Whatever is living beneath the mesa, if the scientific team's interpretation of the data is correct, is something that the existing biological and geological literature has no category for, and the absence of that category is not a minor gap. It is a hole in the scientific understanding of what is possible in the natural world large enough to require a significant and sustained revision of multiple fields of research simultaneously. The implications for the ranch's documented history of anomalous phenomena are equally significant. If there is a living presence beneath the mesa, the phenomena that have been documented above it for decades, the equipment failures, the health effects on researchers, the atmospheric anomalies, the aerial phenomena concentrated in the mesa's airspace, become potentially explicable as the surface manifestations of an active subsurface biology rather than as independent and unconnected anomalies. The mesa would not be the location where Skinwalker Ranch's phenomena are most concentrated because of some abstract property of the geography. It would be the location where they are most concentrated because something living there is generating them, either directly through its biological processes or indirectly through whatever mechanisms it uses to interact with the environment above it. That reframing changes the entire investigative program. It changes what questions the investigation should be asking, what evidence it should be prioritizing, and what the goal of the investigation actually is. Because understanding a geological and electromagnetic anomaly is a different project from understanding a living organism that has apparently occupied the space beneath the mesa for a period of time that the investigation has not yet been able to determine. The public statement Brandon Fugel has made about the mesa detection and the shutdown of the investigation is carefully bounded. He has confirmed that the scientific team found something significant. He has confirmed that the findings prompted him to halt the current phase of investigation. He has framed the shutdown in terms that acknowledge the seriousness of what was detected, without fully characterizing what the detection showed or what the scientific team's interpretation of the data concluded. The gap between what he has said publicly and what the people close to the investigation know he knows is a gap that those who follow Skinwalker Ranch closely have learned to read carefully, because Brandon Fugel is not a person given to understatement, and when he is understating, the distance between what he is saying and what he knows is itself a measure of how significant the undisclosed information is. The people close to the investigation describe a Brandon Fugel who has not simply been shaken by the mesa detection data in the way that a dramatic and unexpected scientific finding shakes someone. They describe a man man who has been processing a specific and detailed understanding of what the data implies, and who has been doing that processing against the backdrop of everything he has personally witnessed and experienced at the ranch across years of ownership. Brandon Fugal has had experiences on the Skinwalker Ranch property that he has not fully disclosed publicly. He has been deliberately measured in what he shares about his personal encounters at the ranch, more measured than the members of his scientific team who have spoken more openly about the effects the property has had on them. And that measured quality of his public persona on the subject of the ranch is understood by the people who know him to reflect not a lack of significant personal experience, but a deliberate choice about how much of that experience to bring into the public conversation at any given point. The Mesa detection data gave that deliberate choice a new and more urgent dimension. What Fugal knows about what is beneath the Mesa, assembled from years of personal experience at the ranch, from conversations with the scientific team that have not been made public, and from the specific content of the detection data itself, is a body of knowledge that his public statements have been carefully shaped around without fully revealing. The shutdown he ordered was driven by that knowledge, and the terms on which he will eventually share it fully are terms that the current moment has not yet produced. The shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered is not the end of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. It is the end of the investigation as it was previously configured, operating on assumptions about the Mesa that the detection data has permanently invalidated. What comes next is structured around a single question that everything before it has been building toward. What is living beneath the Mesa? The biological material and the full detection data record are being analyzed now, and the results of that analysis will determine the terms on which the investigation resumes and the terms on which what was found is disclosed publicly. For Brandon Fugal, this is the moment his 6 years of ownership have produced. He came to the ranch for answers. The Mesa detection is an answer, but one that opens onto questions larger than anything the investigation began with. Something is beneath the Mesa. It is alive. It has been there across decades of documented phenomena that the people above it could not explain because they did not yet know what was generating them. Now they know. What Brandon Fugal does with that knowledge is the chapter everything before it was building toward.